into the darkness because he felt going into the light was a trick. I don't know. Hey, Brenda, you're back on the show.
Good. Yes, Gary. Wow. Well, I went through the tunnel and ended up in the light. In the presence of the Almighty. Nobody in a million years could have made me think that something like that would or could happen.
Well, it does happen because, I've had some major guests on my show. One guy, hey, James, how many times did he, I can't think of his name right offhand.
RW.
Yeah, RW. How many times did he die?
7. And I keep telling him to stop because he may only have 2 more left.
Yeah, he died 7 times. One in a major car accident where he broke virtually every bone in his body. Then he had cancer. Then he had all these other problems. And each time, it was like he went through this tunnel again, and he saw all these beautiful lights and all this stuff as he went up to heaven, got to see, his relatives and talk to some of them. But then it wasn't his time, and he was told he had to go back. And he went back. So like with you, here you are, you're on this cloud, you're looking down the city. What you're saying is, was that God or was it Jesus that it approached you?
You know what? I think it was Jesus. And the reason why I think that, when I felt uncomfortable, when I felt unclean, and he said to me, "Don't worry, I died for that."
Interesting.
That's what he said. He said, "Don't worry, I died for that."
Now, these people that you saw, they had human body forms, but they were dressed in white.
Right. They all had human body forms, dressed in white robes, and they too were illuminated with light. The whole city, everything illuminated with light. And it had this kind of joyous atmosphere and peace. And I mean, you wouldn't want to leave there. And when I talked about the singing, it wasn't just the people who were singing, but there were flowers there, and the flowers were singing. Oh my God. I mean, I've never could have dreamed about this before. So I'm standing there, and he approaches and he looks at me, and he's talking to me, only not verbally, telling me that I have to go back. And he touches the man on the shoulder who was trying to help me to get up on the golden pavement. He touches him on the shoulder, and he waves his hand very smoothly, very calmly, and shook his head no. Now, when he shook his head no, you could see the light swaying from side to side, and he waved his hand, and very quickly I felt like I was falling. I felt like I was falling when he did that. And I went through, I saw clouds, I saw stars, and the next thing I know, I was back into that tunnel. And going very, 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 very quickly through the tunnel. It was like, whew. And I felt my body when I hit the gurney. I don't know how long I was there, but immediately excruciating pain. And I had been zipped up in a body bag and started to cry. And they came and got me, took me back to the operating room. And here I am, back to the operating room. And I was in intensive care for over a month. It was an experience. But what happened after that was also an experience.
Well, I gotta ask you some questions here because people are asking me questions. I gotta ask you questions. Now,
all right.
okay, when you were, in a body bag and then they brought you back and then you came back to life. I mean, what did the doctors tell you afterwards? What did they tell you when you
know what
recovered?
They told me? You are a lucky young woman. And then they put me in isolation where I got no rest because the doctors and nurses were in and out of there questioning me about my experience and telling me how lucky I was. Only I didn't feel lucky because I was in so much pain. It was much better there, and I really wanted to stay there.
Interesting. A lot of people say that, but again, like I remember R.W. going up there and in heaven and again, seeing his relatives and his relatives, telling him, you got to go back. It's not your time and all that stuff. But I don't know. I
think when you're sent back for a purpose.
A lot of people have told me when they came back, they were a lot better person than that when they it changed their whole life. I know one person I interviewed.
Definitely changed mine.
The guy said he was really not a nice person. He did a lot of things. He didn't care if he hurt people, both financially, emotionally. And when he came back, he said it totally changed him instantly.
I think it's impossible to have that experience and not come back changed. Because, first of all, a lot of us, we believe in God. We believe, or we may not believe in God. But after an experience like that, And there's nothing that anybody can ever do to take that away from you because and you want to be a better person. You want to do what's right when prior to that, maybe it didn't make much difference. And maybe you had doubt. But after that experience, you will never doubt again. And there's a certain peace that you get with knowing that there is really a God. I mean, Jesus is real.
Now, how many people did you see when you were up in heaven? I mean, was there?
Oh my God, I couldn't. Thousands. As far back as I could look, there were people. They were everywhere. And there were also angels, but there were different types of angels. Some of them, as I mentioned, I didn't know they were angels. I thought they were animals because they had 4 faces, a lion face, a human face. I mean, they did not resemble, some angels look like people. And there are some angels, I guess hopefully we'll get a little time to talk about angels, but there are some angels that are specifically created to be assistants to mankind. And of course, those angels look human. And I believe that we encounter them here, and we don't know it.
That is a possibility, yes.
Mm-hmm. I believe that. But after I finally recovered, it changed my life forever. And I started really doing a lot of things differently, like praying, fasting. And one day I was praying, and I've been praying for a little bit, and I was meditating, and suddenly I felt this presence in the room. I was so afraid that I didn't want to turn around to see what it was. And I heard a sound, and the sound was like wind. And I turned slightly, and I noticed that the papers that was on my dresser were blowing around the room. They had fallen. Some had fallen on the floor. And so I turned a little more, and there stood about a 9-foot angel. He was so big that he took up all of the space in my room. The wingspan was about 6 feet. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't talk. I was trembling. I was so afraid. And the first thing he says to me is, "Don't be afraid." And I thought to myself, I am beyond fear. I am petrified, And so he repeated it a second time. He said, "Don't be afraid." And he was completely white, but radiant at the same time, light. The room, my bedroom, seemed to have like fog in it. And I found out later that was the glory of God. I didn't know anything about that. But my whole room was foggy, and he began to talk to me. And he said, "You have been chosen to tell God's people that he's real and to teach them how to worship him." And when he said that, he had this, it wasn't a box. It looked like it was made out of maybe glass. And it had jewels on it. And he threw it up, and glitter came out of it. At least it looked like it was glitter. And it got in my hair. It was on the walls. It was on the floor. It was on the dresser. It was everywhere. And then he disappeared. And you could hear the sound of his wings. He disappeared, and I stayed there. I was afraid to move. Finally, I got up, and I opened the door, and I went in the hall, and my son was standing there with his wife. And he said, "Ma, are you okay?" And I said, you won't believe me if I tell you." So he said, "Well, what happened to your hair?" And I said, "What's wrong with my hair?" He said, "Look in the mirror." Well, I had all this glitter in my hair, but on the right side of my hair, it had turned totally white. Now, how do you like that? Totally white. And I said, "BJ, if I tell you what just happened, you're not going to believe me." He said, "I heard you in there." And he said, "It sounded like you were afraid, but," he said, "I know you don't like me to come in when you're praying." And I said, "Well, you said I sounded afraid. What was I saying?" He said, "You weren't saying anything." He said, "You were doing, woo, woo." I don't remember doing that. But he said that's what I was doing. So I told him what happened. He looked in the room, and he could see this fog in the room and the glitter everywhere. So I called family and friends and told them, and they all came over, and they saw it too. Now, the next thing that happened as a result of that was that I started praying for people, and they started getting healed. And that really surprised me. It just really kind of blew me away. And I mean, healed from all kinds of things, like HIV. One lady, diverticulitis. Somebody had a heart condition. A little boy who, I can't remember how old he was. I think he was maybe 7 or 8. But the soft spot in his head when he was born, it never closed up. So it was still soft. And so it began to close up. And I attributed that to just being in the presence, the